Good morning, REC insiders, and good morning to our entire audience across the social media platforms. We are reporting today an REC Insight, and I have none other than our very own Director of Operations, Robert Pume, with us today, who is an investor, a landlord, and somebody who's been in real estate, his entire life. I'm also very excited that we have, it's a very timely issue that we're going to be talking about today. And I have Kayla Andrade with Ontario Landlord Watch with us. They're based out of Cambridge, Ontario. Welcome, Kayla.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And welcome, Robert. What I wanted to really discuss today, guys, and I want to get into a few things, is COVID-19 is now with us. We're kind of 2 weeks into this thing, and there's a lot of discussions and there's a lot of buzz around key items. This insight is geared towards tenants and landlords, because it's not just about a landlord matter, it's about tenants and landlords. So we're going through an unprecedented time. There is no precedent. We're in uncharted waters, and basically we're trying to navigate a health crisis that's affecting people's lives, both from an employment standpoint, a health standpoint, and we're trying to really project and navigate through what can be an economic disaster if it's not managed properly. So there's a lot of anxiety in the marketplace, and especially in our community. We are a real estate consultancy group. We do real estate sales, we do investor advisory and consultation. We build out portfolios for people. And we're getting, if I were to tell you, dozens to hundreds of inquiries over the last couple weeks with people concerned on, I'm a tenant, do I pay my rent? I'm a landlord, am I going to get paid? I heard that people don't have to pay their rent and they cannot be evicted. So there's a whole bunch of questions out there right now that are making both tenants and landlords very anxious. And that's what I wanted to shed some light on. Kayla, I'm going to start with you. You're with the Ontario Landlords Watch. Tell me a little bit about Ontario Landlords Watch.
So Ontario Landlords Watch is a closed Facebook group on Facebook. We meet once a year in Cambridge for an annual meeting. It is our members consist of landlords, property managers, paralegals, real estate agents who understand the Residential and Tenancy Act, the Landlord and Tenant Board, and we support each other through the day-to-day operations. So we advocate for changes at the provincial level as well as municipal. But our main goal is to teach our members about what is happening in the political side of real estate and teach them how to advocate for this industry, not only for themselves, but for their customers, which are the tenants.
Awesome. Bobby, tell me a little bit about your experience as an investor. How many doors do you have, buddy?
So we have 6 doors under our belts. That's my girlfriend and I. We also have a small property management company that takes on a total of about 30 doors. So it's sort of an all-encompassing thing with us. We've hinged a bunch of our investment dollars on real estate. We also help others to make sure that they are secure in doing the same.
So you personally are responsible for putting 6 doors in Ontario's economy, where people,
Yep.
So you're a housing provider.
Yes, sir.
What I want to do in this is I also want to clean up the language a little bit because landlords, and during a time like this, like there can be a bad connotation of who is not empathetic and all this kind of emotion around it. So Bobby, you're a housing provider. I know I'm a housing provider in how many doors that I run. Kayla, are you also an investor and landlord?
I have. I've been a landlord for the last 17 years, and I have a total of 18 doors.
Okay. So we're not talking, so you're not a large corporation. You're not a massive real estate investment trust with 5,000 doors. You have 18 doors to your name. It's taken you 17 years to get there.
Yes.
So would it be safe to assume that this is your nest egg in the way that you look at running your life?
It's my retirement plan for sure. It doesn't come easy. My husband does a lot of our work, and I stay home with our 4 children.
Okay. So God bless your family. I hope you guys are staying safe. So would you say that you're anxious as to what's going to happen in the next few days, April 1st, how many checks are actually going to come in?
Well, right now, a lot of people will start talking about April 1st, and a lot of people are nervous about April 1st. And from speaking with my tenants, I don't think April 1st is that deadline of crisis for them. May 1st and onwards is going to be the crisis mode. That's why for the elected officials, they say, you know, April 1st is coming, people need their funds. But again, landlords are prepared to work with our tenants and through this type of crisis, but it's going to be based on their finances. So if a landlord is financially doing well off, they can indeed wait. But again, the social media and our news presses, they would say that there's deferrals for these mortgage payments. And that's where a lot of misconception comes from, is that not all investors can apply to have their mortgage deferred. And even if they could, we still have the problem that the money still needs to be due. And since the landlord and tenant board was already in a massive chaos or crisis, it's actually going to be an amount of chaos that's going to happen after the pandemic. And that's why it's very crucial that we act now so that we can prepare what the housing industry looks like after the pandemic.
Is the landlord and tenant board open right now?
The Landlord and Tenant Board is accepting applications for illegal acts or safety. Now, if they're hearing applications through the phone for just those 2 applications, there's still no enforcement because the government has stated that they are holding evictions and there's no enforcement for any application. And you can't even apply to have a non-payment of rent application at the board at this time.
Okay. What I'm going to say, and I'm going to make this very clear, is during this pandemic, the number in the number of unemployment, because now we're talking unemployment, we're not talking about layoffs or people who are working from home. So I'm going to say that a cool 90% of the people 2 weeks ago that were working, a cool 90% is either laid off or still working. The unemployment rate in the United States, I don't have the same number for Canada, is at about 10% right now. It went up 3-4%. So it went to 10%. I don't want to focus on the 5 to 10%. Because that's real and that's normal. If you are a landlord and your tenant is out of a job during this crisis and everything else, it is prudent that we all do our very best to work with what we have. I'm far more concerned about the misconceptions in the marketplace for the other 90%. Meaning, if you got laid off and your income went down by 60%, so be it. This is a pandemic and we're all going to get hurt. Every single one of our businesses is going to get hurt. But to the tenant, you still have to make ends meet. Your landlord still needs to pay their mortgage. If you need to call your landlord and work with your landlord, if you are a landlord and you need to call your tenant to check in, are you and your family safe? Have you been impacted negatively due to work? If somebody were to call me and I would say, yes, my business went down by 80%, I'm going to have some tough times ahead. But my mortgage is coming out. The tenant, if they were impacted and their income is now down by 40% and they're on EI or they're on a special package, maybe as a landlord, I need to be empathetic and I need to consider taking payments over a structured amount of time, working with them. But what cannot happen is a notion in the marketplace that because of COVID, I don't need to pay the rent and this is not my problem. This is the government's problem, and the landlord is now left hung to dry with deferrals, fees, mortgage payment defaulting, and all the things that go with it, which is going to create a disaster in the marketplace, not only for the landlord, but I think it will take doors off the market in a market that already is at 1% vacancy or less. Mm-hmm. If landlords have to take their doors off the market, the city of Toronto, for example, and I'm just going to use Toronto because we live here, this is where we practice. We were sitting at 0.6% vacancy 2 weeks ago. If any of this inventory gets compromised if landlords have to sell their properties, if any of this housing gets compromised, we are going to be in a world of hurt. You're going to further stress the rest of the inventory, and prices are going to skyrocket completely out of control. Kayla, tell us a little bit about that.
It's going to be what we have to see the need of people right now before the pandemic. It's all about housing. It's about affordable housing. We kept asking ourselves, do we have an affordable housing crisis, or is this a supply and demand issue? We like to look at the way that the government is managing their own social housing, how they're trying to create social housing. And for us, we really try to see what's happening in the Waterloo region, where, you know, they're taking $12.7 million of provincial, federal, municipal, and crowdfunding to create 48 units. And this is when we kept telling them, you know, do you want to be the government, want to be the landlord and keep paying to build, to manage, to maintain, to pay for the taxes, to pay for the maintenance on all of these type of rental properties, when all you have to do is work with landlords, give them a better toolbox to work with, and give them the tools. Because after this pandemic is all said and done, if there's no relief in towards helping the landlords so that landlords can help their tenants, then we're going to see the recouping side of things. So if the eviction happens, then once that eviction happens, now we're going to see our landlords increasing the rents to get to recoup that cost. So we need to really understand that it's about who is the providers and how can we work with you to do it, because through this pandemic, it's our shelter, it's our food, it's our utilities, and it's our first responders. This is where our government taxpayer funds need to go in order to protect the current supply. And I can't say after all this is done, I think our elected officials will start to look at housing a lot closer, and hopefully we can just get a minister of housing, period, because we currently have a minister of municipal affairs and housing. We need one minister to deal with this because we've always had a crisis. This is now chaos, and it's going to be even more catastrophic when landlords look like the mean people when the landlord and tenant board opens up again and we have to evict the people, not because of their hardship, but even for us deferring our money and our utilities and our insurance. You still, if it's 3 months, if it's 6 months, that money still needs to be paid. And if landlords are trying to work out a payment plan with their tenants now, or work out a payment plan when they finally do get to the landlord and tenant board, you can see evictions now lasting 18 months. Now, can our small to mid-scale landlords deal with that burden of taking care of the tenants, or are they going to sell it? Are they going to sell it to a homeowner?
I'll answer that question for you right now, because like my group, we're responsible for the sale of over 600 properties a year. 80% of our client base are investors, small and medium investors. Mm-hmm. That's the truth. The units, because of the pricing of the market and the constrained supply, the prices were already too high, meaning the investor had to settle for a very small amount of cash flow and depend on the market progress to kind of make their investor goals happen. In this case, if the rents don't come in for 1, 2, 3, 6 months, depending on how long this goes, they are most definitely not going to be able to sustain their units.
No, we have money that's going to come from the elected officials. They're talking, Justin Trudeau is talking about his EI benefits. We're getting more money for child tax. We're getting more money for GST. But in reality, we're caused so much panic in the unknown that people are wanting to not take that money and pay rent and groceries and what it's designed for. They might need to hold it because they don't know. And it's only right that they don't know, that they don't have that rainy day fund for tenants. And then on the other side, we've had landlords who have been dealing with the landlord and tenant board and with a non-paying rent already for 8 months, and now their rainy day funds are wasted based on the problems that had come before that, and now all their evictions are on hold.
What is you know what, let me ask Bobby a question. Bobby, what are you doing today with the 30 doors that you manage? Have you called your clients that you're property managing? What is the strategy that you're deploying right now? What are you doing with your properties?
It starts with the tenant, right? This is a customer service relationship, and that's the bottom line. We've reached out and we're trying to just be ahead of every single thing that we can be. We want to know where our tenants are at with job layoffs, with job security in general, We want to know that they do have a bit of a reserve so that we can help them through the first 30, 60, 90 days, if that's what it's going to take. And then as new things are released from the government, just in general, we're placing those links into their hands so that they can be then ahead of the game. When it comes to the other side of this, though, investors are scared. And I think that it's rightfully so. There's movements out there saying, just don't pay your rent. Just don't. And I mean, we need to find some sort of way to calm some of these things. And it's going to happen through communication. That's just the belief there. What I'm trying to tell the investors that I manage properties for, and what we're doing ourselves, is just consolidating all funds that we can. So we work towards having a vacancy budget, a repairs and maintenance budget, and we're consolidating those to see where we're at and how long those things can last us before we need to make any particular decision. But it is my greatest fear that we then take doors away from the supply as it is currently. I don't think that it'll come to that. I hope that it doesn't come to that. But the stark reality is that it can come to that.
Right. And what is the psychology of the tenant right now? Are you finding people are still pretty positive? Are they terrified? How the people that you've spoken to, what is their where is their head at? How are they feeling as human beings?
Yeah, thankfully, I mean, we've always had good tenant relations. It's how I pride myself on running that particular arm of my business. So people are open with us. There's fear. They don't know where they're going to land. I had a conversation yesterday with a young guy who believes that he will lose his job, and perhaps it's a little bit of fear mongering in the marketplace that's happening, but that's what his fear is. So we're there to enlighten. We're there to help him feel better about what's going on, and I do want to ensure these people that they're not going to lose their homes, but without help on our end as well, I can't guarantee something like that.
Kayla, I'm going to turn this back to you. What do you recommend Ontario housing providers, Ontario landlords need to do today to lobby help from the government? Should they be, is there a way to organize people? Like, what is it we're actually looking for? Are we looking for a rent back by the government, where the bank actually comes in and facilitates? If you're a tenant, you have to pay your rent, but if you cannot, please provide this paperwork to the Ontario Rent Bank and we'll give you a subsidy. Like, what is it we're actually looking for in your personal view or in your association's view? What are we looking to accomplish here?
To keep the supply happening and keep the taste of rental, long-term rental units in the mouths of these investors, to keep them, because not everyone wants to be a landlord and not everyone's cut out to be a landlord. So we have to cease the fact that there's a lot of risks out there before the pandemic, and there's even more of a risk now. We have to get the funding, which we have rent banks right across the province now for tenants who are in hardship. They can't pay you rent. You direct them into their agency. Sometimes they're called rent banks, sometimes it's called Lutherwood, but they're there to help tenants, guide them through their finances to see if they qualify. If they do, they direct the money to them. We have the government coming out with different type of programs, saying it's rent and groceries, but they have to have a bigger fund put aside for the rent portion, and it has to come directly to the landlord so that we can keep people from dealing with the panic, knowing that there's a roof over to their head. But we need to be able to work with our networks, because it's not about me contacting the elected officials. This is about teaching our members in the group, teaching other people, other networks on how politics is really running this industry. And we know with their involvement and what they're currently, how it's currently, the policies are, it was already damaging to the housing industry, creating that supply and demand issue. We need to give them the understanding. Our elected officials need to say, we need to protect our housing stock. We need to support our landlords. Yes, it is a business, just like any other business right now is taking a hit, but we have to understand that we're not about, removing the eviction order. Right now, people need to stay in their homes. We don't care for that. You've taken that over, but at the same time, they need to be able to say, here's the compensation, because the government has landlords, the private landlords working for the government with no compensation. And we want to work with our people, and not everyone's bad, but sometimes we're going to see ourselves in a very hard spot after this, as can Can we survive the pandemic? And can we survive the 18 months that could potentially happen through trying to evict someone through the landlord and tenant board?
Yeah,
So
and I think
get more generic, no generic letters. This is about your personal letter, your understanding, because we need to get our taxpayers on the go with this, because in reality, taxpayers are paying for government housing. We're paying for shelters, emergency shelters, more police service. We pay $400 a day to keep someone in the hospital because they can't find accommodations for the people living in the hospitals. The overall housing crisis that we have, this is not just landlords. This is what we pay as taxpayers now to certain type of programs that are out there that are already at their wits' end.
So I think the bottom line is this. People have a misconception that tenants are always the victim. Tenants are our clients and our lifeline. We respect and we love our tenants and we take care of them. In Ontario, I can say very proudly, has some of the best housing on the globe in our rental stock.
Mm-hmm.
If people want to research it, within 2 minutes, they can see rental properties in other cities across both the industrialized and first world and in countries that are coming up and everything else. Ontario, I can tell you, has some of the best housing. Ontario has some of the best housing providers. And the worst landlord in Ontario, I can tell you without a doubt, and this is by no means something that I'm proud of to say, but our community housing is despicable. It's ran like a joke. It is underfunded. It is consistently misguided and ran like complete crap. For lack of another, of any other, because I've been to a million community housing projects. And when people call them projects in the bad sense, they truly are.
Mm-hmm.
And there is nothing like it across Ontario other than community housing in that state.
But you know what we also have to consider? I couldn't agree with you more. You can see me nod, and I just really get into it because of the fact that we have that development of $12.7 million for 48 units. And we keep giving the government a sample and said, hey, instead of creating your own and having the land gifted from a church to a developer, why don't we give homeowners $70,000? It's on the high end, but let's work ourselves, we could do even 50%, but let's give them $70,000 and say, create a secondary suite. No guidelines, no stipulations. It just has to stay a rental. You now put 181 units on the market, and you now just provided income for 181 homeowners. So it's a win-win situation. Now the government doesn't have to deal with the maintenance. They don't have to deal with the management. They don't have to, they're getting taxes. You're now created a secondary suite, so your taxes of that property now will go up there.
And you recreated a tenant pool across the city inside the best areas, elevating the diversity inside these communities, as opposed to creating these project ghettos where you have everybody from a specific background all in one. Instead of being inspired and lifted, they are stuck inside a place where nobody wants to be.
You got it.
I couldn't agree with you more.
And now let's say the protection side, because we're always greedy landlords. No matter which way you can talk to, you're blue in the face to some tenants, and they will always say you're the greedy landlords. And then we have our great ones. But if we look at that, we have bad landlords, and we have to talk about that. And normally the bad landlords are usually the ones that are not putting any type of maintenance into their rental property. But there's guidelines for that. We have you have the RTA, and the LTB is there for tenants to apply to the Landlord and Tenant Board. They get to pay $53 to file an application, and landlords are now being charged $200. But if you don't want to wait for the Landlord and Tenant Board to deal with your maintenance, that's fine. You can call bylaw, and bylaw sends in their inspector. If they come in and inspect your unit, it could be about mold, but they're looking at everything else. It's not just the mold they're looking at. Now they create a worksheet for you to complete this. And if you don't, they're going to come in, they're either going to fine you, or they're going to be putting the work into the place and putting it to your property taxes. The protection is there to get to have for these tenants. And when we create the supply, we can now not have the tenants feeling that they're trapped with this slum landlord. We can now let them go. If they're a slum landlord and you want to leave them high and dry on their rent to go elsewhere where you're going to pay your rent and you're happy there, there's a system in place to deal with the slum landlords. But when you have a tenant that is abusing the current system, that is where we get ourselves into trying to protect all parties, because our good tenants are suffering because of the bad ones.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I'm going to ask a couple of you one last question. Bobby, I know you wrote a really comprehensive letter to all your tenants. Am I able to make that available to our listeners?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay, so send that over to me. If anybody has the need for some guidance, Bobby is going to share the letter that he wrote to all his tenants and his clients' tenants, which kind of just outlines how are you, where are you at, do we need to talk, are you going through hardship? It's basically a letter to open up communication channels and give the tenant a perspective of what we're going through as landlords, that we have bills to pay, we're going to maintain your property. If you have any troubles during these times, understand social distancing is key, so we're not going to be able to send a plumber in tomorrow morning. We're going to have to make sure that you're not home for them to be comfortable to come in. So basically it outlines, because I read it and it's awesome, it outlines a little bit about the process that we have to go through right now as landlords to get your property serviced. And it opens the channels of communication. If you are, as a tenant, going through hardship, not every landlord is a greedy, gross landlord. 90% of us, like the rule 90-10 in everything, 90% of us are human beings that understand your situation as a tenant. And we just hope that you can understand our position, because we're not big corporations with any back nets to catch us when we fall. Until the government does something, we're going to be left hung to dry, and we're going to be at the mercy of huge fees from the banks and whatever it is they're going to do, because I can assure you the banks will never lose through all this. So thank you, Bobby, for that. If you are interested in the letter, just shoot us a quick message and we can send it to you via email. We also might be able to post it on our site, so we'll see about that. Kayla, how does one get involved with Ontario Landlords Watch? Tell us, how can you be reached, and what is the ultimate goal here? How can somebody reach out to you?
So we have our Ontario Landlords Watch members group. There'll be some questions that we'll ask. How did you find out about us? Make sure that you were stating that you heard us from the REC Canada, so that we can get you into the group a lot quicker, and following us on our Instagram and Ontario ONT Landlords, as well as our page. So every time something is happening, this is about where we can inform you of what's happening and how you can get involved, so we can teach you on who to contact and how to contact them and what to say. And if you stretch the message out to your network, this is about landlords being an easy target for the government to put their responsibility onto a private investor. We need to make sure that we're reaching out to our contacts, uniting ourselves as a united voice, and getting ourselves respected as a necessity, and having the government's backing when we need to show support to our tenants, because we're all in it together.
I couldn't agree more. I want to thank you so much both of you for being on this call. I hope all the best to you and your families from the pandemic perspective. Stay safe, keep practicing social distancing, and I hope we all come out of this whole. Obviously, human lives and health comes before anything we're doing, but it's really hard to stay indoors thinking of all the things that can happen as an investor, as a landlord, as a tenant, when you don't know when your next check is going to come from. I wish you all the very best, and I hope maybe we'll do a little update in the next 2-3 weeks as to government conditions, if anything has changed. But until then, again, thank you. My name is Simeon Papailias, and this was an REC Insight. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you, guys.